The cargo ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, and Commander Cale Vance gripped the metal railing to steady himself against a violent motion that rattled through the hull like thunder rolling across an angry sky. He'd been running for 3 years now, jumping from station to station across the outer rim of the galaxy, always staying one step ahead of the hunters who wanted him dead or worse. The Velkhorth Eternal Dominion had declared humanity a feral species after Earth refused to kneel before their empire, and they had burned every human world to ash and glass in punishment for that defiance. Cale was one of the last survivors of the warship Defiance, which had fought until its final breath against the Dominion fleet above Mars before being torn apart by weapons that humans could barely understand. He remembered the screams over the communication channels as his crewmates died around him, and he remembered the silence that followed when there was no one left to scream. Now he survived by stealing ships and selling information and doing whatever dirty work kept him fed and fueled for another jump to another forgotten corner of space. The station called Nexus 7 hung in the void like a rusted metal tumor, a lawless place where smugglers and refugees and criminals gathered to trade and hide and forget. Cale had chosen it because the Dominion rarely bothered with such places, considering them beneath their notice and not worth the effort of patrolling. He pulled his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders and stepped off the cargo ship onto the station's main deck, where the air smelled of recycled oxygen and engine grease and desperation. Hundreds of aliens from dozens of species moved through the corridors in a constant flow of bodies and voices speaking languages Cale only half understood. He kept his head down and his hand near the plasma pistol hidden beneath his jacket as he made his way toward the Cantina district, where he could find cheap food and cheaper information. The bounty on his head had grown larger over the years as the Dominion grew more frustrated with their inability to catch him, and now every hunter in the galaxy knew his face. He had learned to trust no one and to sleep with one eye open and to never stay in any place longer than absolutely necessary. The cantina he chose was a grimy establishment, with flickering lights and tables covered in mysterious stains that Cale decided not to think about too carefully. He ordered a drink that tasted like engine coolant mixed with regret and found a corner seat where he could watch every entrance and exit. The other patrons were the usual mix of species, hulking Draxian mercenaries with their 4 arms and scarred faces, slender Quillari traders with their glittering scales, and a few other humans who looked just as lost and broken as Cale felt. He was halfway through his terrible drink when he noticed her sitting alone at a table near the back of the room. She wore a heavy cloak with a deep hood that hid most of her face, and she sat with a stillness that seemed unnatural among the chaos of the cantina. Everything about her screamed wrong to Cale's instincts, which had been sharpened by 3 years of running for his life. She was too clean for a place like this, and too calm. And she watched everything with eyes that seemed to take in every detail without ever moving. Cale decided she was none of his business and turned his attention back to his drink. But something kept pulling his gaze back to her table. He noticed 3 figures making their way through the crowd toward her, and his stomach tightened with the familiar feeling of trouble approaching. The 3 were Corvassi, a reptilian species known for their work as bounty hunters and kidnappers and all manner of violent employment. They surrounded the woman's table with practiced ease, cutting off any escape route she might have tried to use. The leader of the group was a scarred brute with missing teeth and cybernetic implants running along the side of his skull like metal worms burrowing through his scales. He leaned down close to the woman and spoke in a voice that carried across the suddenly quiet. "Cantina, you are coming with us, and you are coming quietly. And if you make any trouble, we will hurt you in ways that will make you beg for death." The woman did not move or speak or show any sign of fear, which seemed to anger the Corvasi leader even more. He grabbed her arm and yanked her to her feet with enough force to make Kale wince in sympathy. "Did you hear me? Female, or do I need to teach you respect the hard way?" The woman finally spoke, and her voice was cold and smooth like ice sliding down a frozen river. "Release me." The Corvasi laughed, and his companions joined in with harsh barking sounds that echoed off the cantina walls. "You think you give orders here? You think you have any power in this situation? You are nothing but merchandise to us." He struck her across the face with the back of his scaled hand, and the crack of the impact made several patrons look away in discomfort. Kale felt something shift inside his chest. Something old and stubborn and impossibly human. Every instinct he had developed over 3 years of survival screamed at him to stay in his seat and mind his own business and let whatever was happening play out without his involvement. He was a hunted man with a price on his head, and no resources and no allies, and absolutely nothing to gain from getting involved in someone else's problems. The smart move was to finish his drink and slip out the back entrance and forget he ever saw anything. But then the Corvasi leader drew a curved blade from his belt and held it up to the woman's face, and Kale watched a thin line of blood appear on her cheek where the edge pressed against her skin. "Maybe we take a piece of you as a lesson in obedience." Kale set down his drink and stood up from his table. He walked across the cantina floor with steady steps that betrayed none of the fear churning in his gut. Every eye in the room turned to watch him, and the silence grew thick enough to choke on. He stopped directly behind the Corvasi leader and cleared his throat. "Let her go." The reptilian turned slowly, and his yellow eyes widened with surprise and then narrowed with contempt. "Walk away, human. This does not concern you. I said let her go." The Corvasi looked at his companions and then back at Kale, and a cruel smile spread across his scarred face. "Do you know who we work for? Do you know what happens to people who interfere with our business?" "I do not care." Kale stepped between the woman and the blade, placing his body directly in the path of any violence intended for her. The Corvasi leader stared at him with an expression that mixed confusion with growing rage. "You would die for a stranger. You would throw away your life for someone you do not even know." Kale met his gaze without flinching. "Yes." The Corvasi leader stared at Kale for a long moment, as if trying to comprehend the strange creature standing before him, who had chosen death for a stranger over the safety of walking away. "You humans are truly as insane as the stories say." He gestured to his 2 companions, and they moved to flank Kale with the fluid coordination of predators who had worked together many times before. "Kill him slowly, and make sure she watches so she understands what happens to those who oppose us." Kale had no time to think as the first Corvasi lunged at him with a serrated knife aimed at his throat. He ducked under the strike and drove his elbow into the attacker's midsection, feeling the impact rattle through his bones as he connected with scales as hard as armor. The Corvasi grunted but did not fall, and his companion was already swinging a heavy fist toward Kale's head. Kale threw himself backward and crashed into a table, sending drinks and dishes flying across the floor in a shower of broken glass and spilled liquid. The cantina patrons scrambled away from the violence, creating a ring of empty space around the combatants who circled each other like wolves fighting over prey. Kale pulled his plasma pistol from beneath his jacket and fired twice at the nearest Corvasi. But the shots went wide as the reptilian moved faster than any creature that size should be able to move a scaled fist, connected with his jaw and sent stars exploding across his vision as he stumbled backward into a support column. The pistol flew from his grip and skittered across the floor, disappearing beneath a table somewhere in the chaos. 2 against 1 now, and both of them were bigger and stronger and more heavily armed than he was. Kale had fought worse odds before, but not by much. And never when he was already exhausted from months of running and hiding and barely surviving. The lead Corvassi hung back with the woman, his blade still pressed against her cheek as he watched the fight with obvious amusement. Finish him, but take your time. I want to enjoy this. Kale blocked a knife strike with his forearm and felt the blade slice through his jacket and into the flesh beneath, sending hot blood running down to his wrist. He grabbed the Corvassi's knife arm and twisted with all his strength, using the momentum to pull the reptilian off balance and slam him face first into the metal column. The impact made a satisfying crunch, but the Corvassi recovered almost instantly and spun around with murder blazing in his yellow eyes. The second attacker came at Kale from behind, and he barely managed to dodge a strike that would have opened his spine. He was losing. He knew that with absolute certainty, but something in his human brain refused to accept defeat, even when every logical calculation said he should surrender or run. Humans did not fight like other species, because other species knew when they were beaten and acted accordingly. Humans just kept fighting, kept struggling, kept refusing to die, even when death was the only sensible outcome. Kale grabbed a broken bottle from the floor and drove it into the neck of the nearest Corvassi, feeling the glass shatter as it pierced through scales and flesh and whatever passed for vital organs in the reptilian body. The creature screamed and stumbled backward, clutching at the wound as dark blood poured between his fingers. One down. The second. Corvassi roared with fury and charged at Kale with both clawed hands, outstretched like weapons designed to tear him apart piece by piece. Kale met the charge head-on, which was probably the stupidest thing he could have done. But his body was operating on pure instinct. Now they collided with bone-jarring force and went down in a tangle of limbs, rolling across the floor through broken glass and spilled drinks that stung in Kale's many wounds. The Corvassi's claws raked across his chest and left burning trails of agony in their wake. Kale headbutted the reptilian with every ounce of strength he had left, and he felt something crack in the creature's skull as the impact connected. The Corvassi went limp, and Kale shoved the body off himself and staggered to his feet. Blood ran down his face and chest and arms, and every breath felt like fire in his lungs. The cantina was silent except for the ragged sound of his own breathing. He turned to face the leader, who still held the woman with his blade against her skin. Corvassi was staring at him with an expression that had shifted from amusement to something closer to uncertainty. You killed my soldiers. Let her go, and you can walk away. You are barely standing. You are bleeding from a dozen wounds. You have no weapon and no allies and no hope of surviving if I choose to fight you. Kale met his gaze without wavering. Maybe. But you saw what I did to your friends. Do you really want to find out if you can do better? The Corvassi hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation the woman moved. She twisted out of his grip with a speed that should have been impossible and drove her palm into his throat with enough force to send him staggering backward. The blade clattered to the floor as he clutched at his crushed windpipe, making choking sounds that grew weaker with each passing second. He collapsed to his knees and then fell forward onto his face and did not move again. Kale stared at the woman, who stood over the body of her captor without a single hair out of place or any sign of distress. You could have done that the whole time. Yes. Then why did you let me fight them? She turned to look at him, and for the first time he could see her face clearly beneath the hood. Her features were beautiful in a way that seemed almost artificial, with skin that had a faint metallic sheen and eyes that glowed with soft bioluminescence. I wanted to see what you would do. Kale felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with his wounds or the cold air of the cantina. What are you? We should leave this place before more of them arrive. Can you walk? He wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers. But she was right that staying here was suicide. More mercenaries would come. and station security would eventually arrive. And either way, Kale could not afford to be identified. He nodded and let her lead him toward a back exit that he had not noticed before, moving through shadows and maintenance corridors until they emerged in a docking bay where a small shuttle waited. "This is yours. It is stolen. Like everything else I own. Get inside before you bleed to death on my deck." She helped him up the ramp and into the cramped interior of the shuttle, where she guided him to a seat and began pulling medical supplies from a storage compartment. "Why did you help me?" she asked as she cleaned the wound on his arm with something that burned like liquid fire. Kale gritted his teeth against the pain. "Because they were going to hurt you. You do not know me. For all you know, I am a criminal or a murderer or something far worse. Are you?" She paused in her work and looked at him with those strange glowing eyes. "That depends on your definition of those words." Well, that is not ominous at all. A ghost of a smile crossed her perfect features. So brief, he almost missed it. "You are strange. Human. My name is Kale." She resumed treating his wounds, her cold fingers moving with precise efficiency. "You may call me Sareth. Just Sareth. For now, yes. Just Sareth." Kale leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes as exhaustion washed over him like a wave. He had survived another day, made another enemy, and picked up another mystery. Just another day in the life of the last human stupid enough to keep fighting. Kale woke to the soft hum of the shuttle's engines and the dull ache of wounds that had been treated but not healed. He was lying on a narrow cot in what passed for the vessel's sleeping quarters, with bandages wrapped around his chest and arms and a blanket pulled over his shivering body. Sarah sat in a chair nearby, watching him with those unnerving eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. "How long was I unconscious?" "Several hours. You lost a significant amount of blood before I was able to treat your injuries." Kale pushed himself up to a sitting position and winced as the movement pulled at his wounds. "Where are we?" "In orbit around Nexus 7. I did not want to leave until I was certain you would survive. That was kind of you. It was practical. I still have questions I wish to ask you." Kale studied her face in the low light, trying to make sense of the strange woman who had entered his life with violence and mystery. Her skin had that faint metallic quality he had noticed before, and her features were too perfect to be entirely natural. She moved with a grace that suggested either extensive training or something not quite human hiding beneath her surface. "Ask your questions, then. Why did you interfere in the cantina?" "I already told you." "Because they were going to hurt you." "That is not an answer. That is a statement of fact. I'm asking why you chose to risk your life for a complete stranger when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose." Kale considered the question more carefully this time. "I do not know how to explain it in a way that will make sense to you. Try." He rubbed his hands over his face and tried to find words for something he had never needed to articulate before. "When I saw them hitting you, when I saw that blade against your skin, something inside me just refused to accept it. It was not a decision I made consciously. It was more like a reflex, like breathing or blinking. A reflex to protect strangers at the cost of your own safety." "I guess so." "Yes." Sarah tilted her head slightly, and her expression shifted to something that might have been fascination or confusion or both. "I have studied many species across many centuries, and I have never encountered this behavior before. Centuries." She ignored his question and continued as if he had not spoken. "Other species protect their families, their tribes, their nations. They form alliances based on mutual benefit, and they break those alliances when the benefit ends. But this, what you did, it defies all logical frameworks for understanding behavior. Humans are not particularly logical, so I am beginning to understand." Kale shifted on the cot and felt a dozen small pains announce themselves throughout his battered body. Can I ask you some questions now? You may ask. I may not answer. Fair enough. What species are you? That is a complicated question. You said you have lived for centuries. You have skin that looks like metal. Your eyes glow in the dark. I think I deserve at least a basic answer. Before Sareth could respond, an alarm began blaring throughout the shuttle. She stood and moved to the cockpit with that unsettling grace. And Cale forced himself to follow despite his wounds. Through the viewport, he could see Nexus 7 hanging in the void below them. And above the station, a fleet of warships had appeared, as if from nowhere. His blood went cold as he recognized the distinctive design of Vel'Korath. Dominion vessels, they found me. How is that possible? You said you had been evading them successfully for years. I do not know. Maybe someone on the station identified me. Maybe they tracked the shuttle somehow. Cale was already moving toward the pilot's seat, his fingers flying over the controls as he tried to plot an emergency hyperspace jump. We need to run. Those ships carry enough firepower to turn the shuttle into atoms. Stop. Something in her voice made him freeze. And he turned to find Sareth watching the approaching fleet with an expression of cold calculation. She reached past him and touched the communication console, and her fingers moved across the controls with the familiarity of someone who had used this exact system many times before. The Dominion ships stopped their approach. They just hung there in space, weapons powered down. Waiting, Cale stared at the viewport, and then at Sareth, and then back at the viewport. What did you do? I told them to hold position. You told the Dominion fleet to hold position, and they just obeyed you. Yes. The cold feeling in his chest spread outward until his entire body felt numb. He took a step backward, away from the woman he had nearly died to protect. Who are you? Really? Sareth reached up and pulled back her hood completely, revealing features that shifted and changed before his eyes. Her skin took on a deeper metallic sheen, and patterns of light began to pulse beneath the surface, like circuits coming to life. Her eyes blazed with bioluminescent power. And when she spoke again, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in his bones. I am Empress Sareth Vel'Korath, the Eternal, Sovereign of the Vel'Korath Dominion. First of the Ascended, she who commands the stars. Cale felt his legs threaten to give out beneath him. You are the Empress. Yes. The Empress of the Dominion that destroyed my homeworld and murdered my species. Yes. The Empress who has been hunting me for 3 years. Technically, my subordinates have been hunting you. I only recently took a personal interest in your case. Cale laughed, and the sound that came out of him was bitter and broken and edged with hysteria. I saved your life. I nearly died protecting you, and you are the ruler of everything I hate. You did not know who I was. That does not make it better. He reached for his pistol and remembered that he had lost it in the cantina fight. Sareth watched him with something that might have been sympathy. If I wanted you dead, Commander Vance, you would have died in that cantina. I did not save your life and treat your wounds so that I could execute you in my shuttle. Then, what do you want? I want to understand. Understand what? She stepped closer to him, and despite everything he had learned in the last few minutes, he found he could not make himself retreat. 3 years ago, your species received our standard ultimatum. Submit to the Dominion or face annihilation. Every species we have encountered in 9,000 years of expansion has made the logical choice and submitted. Your people did not. We do not kneel, so you chose extinction instead. We chose to die on our feet rather than live on our knees. Sareth studied him as if he were a puzzle she could not quite solve. And tonight, you chose to die for a stranger rather than walk away. You knew you could not win that fight. You knew you were outnumbered and outmatched. But you stepped forward anyway. Yes. Why? Cale met her glowing eyes and spoke with all the conviction he had left in his battered soul. Because some things are worth dying for. Because if I had walked away, I would have been something less than human. Because the moment we start calculating whether people are worth saving, we've already lost everything that matters. The Empress of the Velkarth Dominion stared at him for a long moment, and then she did something he never expected. She smiled. The smile on the Empress's face was small and brief, but it transformed her features from cold perfection into something almost warm. You fascinate me. Commander Vance, I would rather not fascinate the woman who destroyed my world. A fair sentiment. Yet here we are. She moved to the viewport and gazed out at the fleet of warships hanging motionless in the void. I have ruled the Dominion for 9,000 years. I have watched 1,000 species kneel before my throne. I have commanded armies that conquered galaxies and built an empire that spans more stars than your people ever knew existed. Is this supposed to impress me? No. It is supposed to provide context for what I am about to tell you. She turned back to face him, and in the glow of the distant suns, her eyes looked almost sad. In all those millennia, in all those conquests, I have never once seen what you showed me in that cantina. What do you mean? The other species we conquered. They fought when they thought they could win. They surrendered when they realized they could not. Their behavior was always predictable because it was always rational. She began to pace the small cockpit, her movements carrying a restless energy that seemed at odds with her eternal composure. Even the ones who resisted, even the ones we had to destroy completely. They fought for something, for territory, for resources, for survival, for the continuation of their genetic lineage. There was always a logical framework that explained their actions. And humans do not fit your framework. Your species knew you could not win against us. Your technology was centuries behind ours. Your military forces were insignificant compared to our fleets. Every calculation said you should submit and survive. We knew. But you fought anyway. Yes. Sareth stopped pacing and fixed him with those glowing eyes. And you, tonight, you knew you could not win against those mercenaries. You knew you would probably die. You knew that even if you succeeded, you would gain nothing. Also, yes, but you fought anyway. For a stranger, for someone you had never met, for someone who might have been your enemy. Cale sank into the pilot's seat, suddenly exhausted beyond anything his physical wounds could explain. That is what humans do. We fight for things that matter even when we know we cannot win. Especially when we know we cannot win. Why? Because giving up is worse than dying. Because there are some principles that do not bend no matter how hopeless things become. Because if we stop fighting for what is right, we stop being human. The Empress was silent for a long time, processing his words with an intellect that had ruled an empire for longer than human civilization had existed. I came to Nexus 7 in disguise because I wanted to observe humans in their natural state. I have read every report about your species. I have watched recordings of your final battles. I have studied your history and your culture and your art. But I did not understand, and now you do. No, but I'm beginning to. And that is more progress than I have made in 3 years of study. She sat down in the co-pilot's seat across from him. And for a moment she looked less like an immortal empress and more like someone genuinely searching for answers. Those mercenaries who attacked me, they were not random criminals. They were agents of a faction within my own court that seeks to overthrow me. You have enemies in your own empire. I have ruled for 9,000 years. I have accumulated many enemies. Most of them are patient and subtle and content to wait for opportunities that may never come. But some have grown bold in recent centuries. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand that I am not simply a monster who destroys worlds for pleasure. I am a ruler who makes difficult decisions for the survival and stability of trillions of beings. Cale felt anger flare in his chest. You murdered 8 billion people on Earth alone. Yes, children, families, entire cultures erased in a single day. Yes, And you expect me to believe you had good reasons. Sareth met his fury without flinching. I do not expect you to believe anything. I am simply trying to explain my perspective, not justify my actions. Then explain. Explain why you could not just leave us alone. Because your species terrified us. The words hung in the air between them. Impossible and absurd. We terrified you. We were nothing compared to your empire. We had barely reached our own moon when your ships arrived. Technology is not what frightened us. Commander, it was your nature, your irrational willingness to fight against impossible odds. Your stubborn refusal to submit, even when submission was the only logical choice. She leaned forward, and her voice dropped to something almost like a confession. We have conquered 1,000 species because they all behave predictably. They all make rational choices. They all value survival above principle, a species that does not. A species that would rather die than kneel. That is a species we could not control. So you destroyed us instead. Yes. And I have regretted that decision every day since. Kale stared at her in shock. You regret it. I did not understand what we were destroying. I thought we were eliminating a threat, but now I see that we eliminated something precious. Something the galaxy needed. What do you mean? Sarah stood and walked back to the viewport. Her silhouette framed against the stars. The Dominion is dying, Commander, not from external threats, but from internal decay. We have conquered everything. We have achieved everything. We have become so focused on survival and expansion that we have forgotten why we wanted to survive in the first place. I do not understand. We have become hollow. We make calculations instead of choices. We pursue efficiency instead of meaning. We have optimized ourselves into emptiness. She turned to face him, and then I watched you step between a stranger and a blade. Knowing you would probably die, and I realized what we have lost. What we destroyed when we burned your worlds. Hope? Yes, hope and courage. And a mad, beautiful belief that some things are worth more than survival. She crossed the cockpit and knelt before his seat. Her glowing eyes level with his. I have an offer for you. Commander Vance, I am listening. Come with me to the throne world. Not as a prisoner, but as an advisor. Help me understand your species. Help me find what the Dominion has lost. Kale laughed bitterly. You want me to serve the empire that murdered my people. I want you to help me change that empire. And why should I trust you? You should not. You have every reason to hate me, and none to believe anything I say. Then why are you asking? Sareth reached out and took his hand. And her touch was cold, but gentle. Because you are the first being in 9,000 years who has made me question everything I thought I knew. Because watching you fight tonight awakened something in me that I thought had died millennia ago. Because I believe you might be the key to saving my empire and redeeming my soul. Kale looked down at their joined hands and felt the weight of an impossible decision pressing down on his shoulders. The ruler of his enemies was asking for his help, and he had no idea what to say. Kale pulled his hand away from the Empress and stood up from the pilot's seat. He walked to the viewport and stared out at the Dominion fleet hanging in the darkness, each ship carrying enough firepower to destroy a planet. These were the vessels that had burned Earth, that had hunted his people to near extinction, that had made humanity into refugees and criminals and prey. I cannot do what you ask. Sareth remained kneeling where he had left her, and when she spoke her voice carried a note of something that might have been disappointment. May I ask why? Because I cannot serve the empire that destroyed everything I loved. Because even if your intentions are genuine, I would be betraying the memory of everyone who died fighting against you. I understand. He turned to face her. But I have a counteroffer. The Empress rose gracefully to her feet, her expression shifting to curiosity. Speak. You say you want to understand humanity. You say you want to learn what we have that your empire has lost. But you will never find that by studying me in your palace like a specimen in a laboratory. Then where will I find it? Kale stepped closer to her, and for the first time since learning her identity, he did not feel afraid. There are human survivors scattered across the outer rim. Refugee fleets hiding in asteroid fields, resistance cells operating from abandoned stations, colonies clinging to life on worlds so harsh even the Dominion does not bother with them. We are aware of these survivors. We have standing orders to capture or eliminate them when found, then change those orders. Sereth tilted her head. You want me to spare the survivors of a species marked for extermination? I want you to do more than spare them. I want you to help them. Help them how? Kale began to pace the cockpit, his voice growing stronger as the idea took shape in his mind. Give them a world, not a prison colony, not a reservation. A real world where they can rebuild, where they can live without fear of being hunted. You are asking me to reverse a 3-year-old extermination order on the basis of one conversation. I am asking you to prove that you meant what you said about wanting to change. The Empress was silent for a long moment. And if I do this, what do you offer in return? I will tell you where the survivors are hiding. I will help you make contact with the resistance leaders. I will vouch for your intentions and try to convince them that you are sincere. They will not believe you. Probably not. But they will listen, and that is a start. Sereth walked to the viewport and stood beside him, both of them staring out at the stars that had witnessed so much destruction. You are asking me to take an enormous political risk on the word of hunted fugitive. Yes, my enemies in court will use this against me. They will say I have gone soft. They will claim I am unfit to rule. Probably. And you still think I should do it? Kale turned to look at her profile, at the alien beauty of her features and the ancient weariness in her glowing eyes. You said the Dominion is dying from the inside. You said you have become hollow and empty and lost. Well, this is how you start to find your way back. By showing mercy to a defeated enemy. By recognizing that mercy is not weakness. That compassion is not inefficiency. That some things matter more than survival. The Empress closed her eyes. Your people would have made formidable members of the Dominion. If we had given you the chance to join willingly, we would have refused. Yes, I believe you would have. She opened her eyes and turned to face him fully. Very well. Commander Vance, I accept your counteroffer. Kale felt his heart skip a beat. You will spare the survivors. I will do more than spare them. I will give them a world. I will give them protection. I will give them the resources they need to rebuild. Why? Why would you do this on the word of one man you just met? Sarah smiled again, that small, warm expression that transformed her face. Because you stepped between me and a blade without knowing who I was or what you might gain. You showed me that some beings still act on principle rather than calculation. She reached out and placed her cold hand against his cheek. Perhaps it is time for an empress to do the same. 1 month later, a transmission went out across the galaxy. From the Eternal Throne, the Empress herself appeared on every screen and every communication channel. A voice carrying to trillions of beings across thousands of worlds. 3 years ago, I ordered the extermination of a species called humanity. I believed they were a threat to the stability of the Dominion. I believed that their destruction was necessary for our survival. Her image paused. And when she spoke again, her voice was softer. I was wrong. The transmission continued. The extermination order is hereby revoked. All human survivors are granted protected status under Dominion law. Any being who harms a human from this day forward will answer to me personally. She announced the creation of a new human homeworld. A fertile planet and a protected system where the survivors could gather and rebuild. Humanity will rise again, and this time the Dominion will stand beside them, not above them. We will learn from them what we have forgotten, and perhaps together, we will become something greater than either of us could be alone. Kale watched the transmission from his shuttle. still hiding in the Outer Rim, still technically a fugitive. He had not gone to the throne world, had not accepted any position in the Empress's court, but he had kept his promise and helped make contact with the survivor communities, had vouched for her intentions, had convinced enough people to take the risk of hoping again. Not everyone believed, not everyone was willing to forgive, and he understood that. But for the first time in 3 years, there was a path forward that did not end in extinction. His communication console beeped with an incoming message, and he opened it to find a simple text from an encrypted source. "Thank you for teaching me to hope again. Perhaps one day you will visit the throne world, not as my advisor, but as my friend." It was unsigned, but he knew who had sent it. Cale leaned back in his pilot's seat and allowed himself a smile. Humanity was not saved. The road ahead would be long and difficult, and filled with challenges he could not even imagine. There would be those in the Dominion who opposed the Empress's decree, and there would be humans who could never forgive what had been done to them. But there was hope now. Real hope, born from one impossible night when a hunted man had chosen to fight for a stranger. He thought about what the Empress had said, about how humans fought for things that mattered, even when they could not win. Maybe that was the real secret. The thing that made humanity special. Not strength, not technology, not numbers or resources. Just the stubborn refusal to stop believing that tomorrow could be better than today. Cale plotted a course for the nearest survivor colony and engaged. The hyperspace drive, he had work to do, and for the first time since Earth burned, he was looking forward to the future.